Good afternoon. This past week has been a monument to contrasts. We started the week with a bunch of questions on the economic front as the White House was beginning to run all over itself as to whether we were in a recession or whether we're not. By the end of the week, all the questions were pretty much answered. Representing the White House, some were simply not accepting the numbers as they were laid out in front of them. On Monday, President Biden was isolating away from his staff still with a case of COVID. Crude oil was trading about $95 a barrel. The national average on retail gasoline was about $4.33 a gallon, and that's about $1.10 above the wholesale price. The national average for diesel was $5.27, and that was about $2 above the wholesale price. Now, it's important to understand that we usually add 35 to 75 cents per gallon to cover the transportation and storage costs from the terminal to the retail point. That's what we call basis. The farther away from the terminal you get, the higher the basis. When basis extends past the normal range that we trade in, that tells us we still have a significant amount of risk in the marketplace. And that's what we're demonstrating right now. On Tuesday, President Biden tested negative for COVID and returned to his full duties. The FOMC started their meeting to discuss raising interest rates from either 75 or 100 basis points. Durable goods orders for June came in at plus 1.9% versus expectations of minus 0.5%. That was a big surprise. That gave some in the administration hope that the GDP would be a positive number too. Also, we got the Case-Shiller existing home sales numbers. They were down, along with University of Michigan consumer confidence number, and that index was lower as well. On Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time, the Fed announced a 75-point increase in the discount rate, and Jerome Powell began to telegraph the White House's line on recession. They just weren't having any of it. Thursday, the first read of the second quarter GDP came in at a minus 0.9%. versus economists' predictions of a plus 0.5%. I was on the lower end of the scale, expecting a minus 0.9, but the GDP report touched off a vicious war of words and definitions between the White House and just about every other economist in the world. The classical definition for recession is 2 consecutive quarters of a negative GDP. The argument was this: Janet Yellen stepped out and started the conundrum, challenging the classical definition of recession by diminishing the numbers and saying that the numbers was inaccurate because the economy was rebounding from COVID. Around noon, President Biden joined in and said he saw the numbers but didn't really believe them, and besides, it takes more than 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP to show that we're in recession. Well, all my economics textbooks tell us that 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP indicate we are in a recession. Now, those were his words, not mine. I guess the previous week's plus 9.1% in the consumer price index and the plus 11.3% in the producer price index really didn't mean anything as well. On Friday, we also got the core PCE numbers. Now, that PCE is the personal consumption expenditures that the Federal Reserve uses as an indicator of inflation, exclusive of food and energy. And that number as well came in a little bit hotter than expected at a plus 4.8% versus expectations of plus 4.7%. To add further craziness to this past week, on Saturday, the president announced that he tested positive again for COVID. This is a case of what's called Paxlovid rebound from COVID, which is apparently quite common. So what does this all mean? First of all, I am most concerned because the textbook definition of recession should not be allowed to be altered for political purposes. Surely we can't be there in this nation's course. If we had anything, at least we had our integrity intact by not trying to openly alter facts and the truth. Second, we once had a politically independent Federal Reserve. That's what we're supposed to have, not one who takes their marching orders from the president's staff. I don't care what side you're on. Our economy requires a fully independent central banking system, and an unbiased press, they jumped on the bandwagon to tip the scales. While Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and I know that's an old movie from the 20s, is not a new phenomenon. After all the hubbub around recession, the real issues to be argued are inflation and stagflation. both of which are rampant today on our economy. We feel the prices inflating food and fuel to the point where they're beginning to stagnate, and we now find ourselves in a situation very similar to what we saw in the late 1970s with President Jimmy Carter. FYI, stagflation, just so you know, is an economic condition in which the inflation rate, the economic is high, the economic growth rate is slowing, and unemployment, like we're seeing right now, remains steady. Ignoring stagflation or even arguing over the definition is the worst of all options and could lead to a much deeper and longer recession with no sustainable growth. This coming week, we'll get a whole slew of unemployment numbers. We'll get the ADP estimates on Wednesday from the private sector. We'll get the weekly unemployment numbers, new unemployment claims numbers on Thursday, and Friday. Friday we'll get the U.S. Department of Labor jobs created numbers, the unemployment rate, the labor force participation rate, wage changes, and much more. Will these metrics remain solid? We certainly hope so. For if they begin to show a crack, we may be in for real trouble in our economy. My motto for 2021 was this: words mean things. People can have a greater or more definite impact on the world by the words that they use. When we work to alter meanings of words to meet a political narrative, we give up our credibility and will destroy what we call the full faith and credit of the United States. We are becoming just like every other nation. And our commodities like crude oil, gasoline, gold, corn, and more become less valuable when we diminish those words. It begs the question, is this the goal of the Biden administration? Have you ever heard a cheerleader in a 5-team pool shout, "We're number 3, we're number 3," and be proud of it?